Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. I am Asad Ali, and today in this video I will create a Flask API. And to create a Flask API, first I will scrape a website and put that scraped data into a database, SQLite database. And after that I will create a simple Flask API endpoint where you can retrieve the data from that database. So let's start. So if you look here, I'm using Visual Studio Code here, and if you have PyCharm, which is fine, and if you are using any other IDE, just open that and go to desktop or anywhere you are saving your code. Just right click there and create a new folder. So let's create a folder and name it Flask API. Inside of that folder, this folder, I'm going to create three files, two Python files and one SQLite file. So here I am going to create a new file. First one is, let's call it a scraper. This file is going to scrape the data and put it into database. And second file is, let's call it Flask API.py. And third one is db.sqlite 3. Alright, now that we have two Python files and one SQL database file, let me just close them, and first let's start with scraper. So to begin with scraper, make sure that you install required libraries first, and the library I'm going to use is request library. Let's import that. If you have a terminal, remember that if you are using Anaconda Navigator, just open your Anaconda terminal, and if you have any other like MacBook or Windows, you can simply open command line terminal as well. Okay, let's install our library first. Pip3 install request. In my case, I have pip2 and pip3, Python 2 and Python 3 as well, so that's why I'm using pip3. If you have only Python 3, you can type pip3 install. If you are on Windows command line terminal, you can type Python or Python 3 -m pip install request. Either way, it's going to install Python in your request in your computer. So now that I have request library installed in my computer, so let's go back to our Visual Studio Code and try to import request library here. The request library is used to send requests over HTTP, means that it is going to send a request to the web server, okay, and in response we are going to get raw HTML data, so we will need another library to parse that data. Let's just first send the request and see what happens. Let me define a function here, define scrape. Let's call it scrape, and I'm going to pass the link inside of that, and okay, so what this method will do is that I will pass a link inside of that, and it will send a request to that link, and it will print the response status code of that request, if it is 200 or anything else. Okay, so let's try to run this. For that I'll have to scrape link, and the link is I'm going to use a sandbox. Sorry. Okay, this is basically to scrape code start to scrape. This is basically sandbag. I mean, this website is built for web scraping, learning web scraping, so you can just use that as well. So I'm going to use this code start to scrape.com, and okay, let me just link equals to this, and now I'm going to run this and see what happens. Okay. Okay, as you can see that I've got 200 response, which means that I have got the response and website didn't block me or anything. Everything is working fine. Okay, next thing is I'm going to use a parsing library. So in reality, let me just show you. See, if you right click and go to view page source, you will see that we have this is the data that we have got in our response that we sent using request library. Now that the request that we have sent to using request library, this is the response. This is how response looks like. So this is basically raw HTML data, and what we need next is that we need something that can parse this data, and we can get the details that we want. Okay, so let's do that and try to import something. So here we have a couple of options. A lot of people are using Beautiful Soup, which is fine, but I highly recommend using other libraries like LXML, which supports exports. And the reason I'm saying this is because Beautiful Soup is no doubt really powerful library, but the problem is that in Scrapy that we use for large scale web scraping and everything, we use exports. And within Selenium, we also use exports and other selectors like CSS selector as well. So, but Beautiful Soup doesn't support that. If you start using Beautiful Soup now, later on, you will have to learn exports and other CSS selectors. So, I recommend using LXML library and use that, and you will have more. You will get familiar with exports as well. So, to use that from LXML, I'm going to import HTML. You can also use E3, which is very much the same, but E3 is also a module inside that LXML library. Okay, so I'm going to use only HTML for now. So the way we use it is let's create a variable here, response equals to HTML. This is the library that we have imported, and here I'm going to use from string and r dot content. All right, now we have response object, which means that now we can use export on that response object to get our like data and every details that we need. So let's try to collect some codes and some other details. So for now I'm going to collect this code and also the author, and to do that, let's just right click on this and go to inspect. You can, if you don't have inspect here, if you right click and there's no inspect in this drop down, you can simply go to view and developer option, and here we have view source developer to inspect element everything. Okay, so just do that. Now what I am going to do is just click on this arrow here and point it to the code, and you can see that we have this div tag. Inside of this div tag we have all the codes and authors and tags. Okay, so let's use this div and class for and use it as a container, and we will loop over all these codes and get the details. Alright, now let's do that. Let's call it containers equals to response dot export and here we have div and class. Now we have all the containers. Now I'm going to go over each container one by one using for loop and get the details. So let's do that for container and containers. I'm just naming these. These are just the variables. Okay, response containers and this container as well. These are just variables. You can use any name you want. Okay, you don't need to worry about it. All right, now let's first get the code and container dot export, and this export should start with a dot, and let's see what we have inside of this. And okay, this basically span and this class. Let's copy class and use it inside span. Okay, span is the tag and class is attribute, and now let's type slash and text. Sorry, not get. Now I'm going to get the author. Okay, this method is same. Just go to this small is the tag and class is attribute. You can also use this this attribute as well. So I'm going to use class here and slash text. Now we have code and author. Let's print them and see if we have got what we were looking for. Alright, I think we have what we need. Let's try to run this. As you can see that we have got our code and the author. These are what happens is that the .export method returns a list. Okay, so what I can do is I can simply check if there are elements in the list, and if so, then it should pass on to the output. And if list is empty, it should return an empty string. Let me show you how. If quote equals to first one. So what happens is that if what I can do is I can simply do this as well, but if a list is empty, it's going to raise an error. So to avoid that, it's a good idea always to make sure that your code is handling exceptions really well. So make sure that it just doesn't just raise an error. And in this case I'm going to add if statement and make sure that there is something in the list, and then I'm going to index that list. And for else statement, just type quote equals to empty. Same for author. If author will be author first element, and in other case it's going to. Right now let's try to run that again. Okay, now you can see the main difference between my previous output and this output is that before I had these two lists for quote and the author, but in this case I have this is the quote and this is the author. So now I have the output I need. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use this db.sqlite file. This is basically a SQLite database file. I'm going to put the data in that. So to do that, simply what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a table first. First, I will import the library SQLite 3. Basically, you don't need to download this library and install it. It's already available in Python package, but you need to import it in your script. Let's import SQLite 3. Okay, and first I'm going to create a connection, a cursor, and if I'll see if I have the table. Right now I don't have a table, but in some cases if you're rerunning the same code, you don't want to create multiple tables, so first I'm going to create a table, and after that I will put the data inside of that table. So let's first create a connection equals to SQLite 3 dot connect, and inside of that you need to add path of your SQLite database file, but in this case we have db.sqlite 3 in the same directory, so I don't need to put the whole path in that. Okay, now that we have this db.sqlite 3 file here, let's create a cursor equals to connection dot cursor. That's it. Okay, now we have cursor and connection. Let's try to run a query and create a database table. So to run a query, type cursor dot execute, and inside of brackets I need to let's use this, and now I'm going to run a query inside of that, create a query inside of that. To create a database table, type create table if not exists. Here I'm going to name the table. Let's call it Flask API table, and after that just insert some values here. I'm going to add two values here. First one is let's call it quote. These values are basically the columns of the table. Okay, quotes, it's going to be a text value and text field, and second one is author, sorry, IOTH or author. and it's also going to be a text field. All right, and one more thing I'll probably have is the ID field, and it's going to be an integer field that will increment as we insert new values. Okay. Okay, so now what will happen is that this query is going to create a table if that table already exist, and it's going to name it Flask API table, and it will have three columns: ID, quotes, and author. First one is the ID. ID is going to be a number that every time increases every time we add a new row, and we have quotes and author. Now that we have our table and the columns that we need, now I'm going to use this cursor and upload the data to that database file. Alright, let's put a query here, cursor dot execute, and don't forget to commit as well. Okay, if you're using SQL, if you're familiar with SQL language, then SQL database, then in that case we used to do cursor.commit, but in SQLite we do connection.commit. Okay, let's just do commit here, and let's execute another query here, and here I'm going to insert a row, where we will have these author and quote as a values. Cursor.execute, and here now I'm going to create another query. Just I'm using these three quotes because we have single quotes here and double quotes here as well. So every time I'm going to insert a string, if there is already a quote inside of that will create problems. So it's a good idea to if you are using multi-row string, then you should use triple quotes. Okay, now let's type a query here. Insert into database name, sorry, table name, and now let's use those columns. Columns are quotes and author, and values are in our case we have two values. Let's insert those values. Sorry. And remember that in SQL, what happens is that every time you have a comma, single inverted comma or double inverted commas, you will have to like replace them with, let's say if I have two single inverted commas, it will treat it as one. So the reason I'm saying this is because in this case, if I put let's say author, in this case we have quote and author, and but the problem is if you look here we have got this inside single inverted commas, and if we get the same inverted comma in this string, it will create an error for SQL table. Okay, so the workaround is that just simply replace uh, single inverted comma with double inverted comma. So what will happen is that every time there is a single inverted comma, like if you look here we have this it is short form of it is, and there's a inverted comma here, and what will happen if I put this quote here, what will happen is that this comma will end at this place and rest of it will be just exposed, so it will raise an error. So to avoid that, just simply type dot replace, and it will work just fine. Alright, and don't forget to commit dot commit, sorry, connection dot commit. Okay, now we have our table, we have our database, we have our table, and I think it should just work fine. Okay, let's try to run it and see what happens. Alright, we have exists. Okay, I think I made a mistake, typing mistake. Exist. Okay, I made a mistake, so let's try to run it again. We have another typo here. Our ID, integer, primary, and key are supposed to be separate. Okay, and let's run it again. Alright, now if you look here, we don't have any errors and execute just fine. Now the next thing is to make sure that to see if uh, data is successfully inserted in our table. If you are using Visual Studio Code, we will need few extensions to open that database. If you look here, we have SQL tools option here, but if you click on it, you will probably not see add new connection here, maybe. So what you can do is just go to extensions, type SQL here, and or probably SQLite. Okay, and if you see, we have got SQL tools, and just make sure that you install this SQLite library. Okay, and I guess this one is this SQLite, and second is this SQL tools SQLite. Both of these extensions are really good and simple to use. Okay, to open that, just click on this, and if you see this add new connection, just click on this button and you will see these three options. Okay, if you haven't installed SQLite, the second extension I mentioned, this one, you will not have this option, so it's better if you just install that one as well. So once you do that, you will see this SQLite option as well. Just click on this one, and let's call it Flask API database. And here I'm going to select the file that I have created inside tutorials, Flask API, and this is the one that I have created, SQLite. Okay, now let's try to run this one. Save connection, connect now. Let's go back to database. Now here I can run the queries. Okay, so let's try to run this and see if the data is successfully inserted or not. Select everything from the table name. What was the table name again? Flask API table. Let's copy that and put it here, and let's run it. No such table, Flask API table. Okay, tables, nothing here. Okay, no worries. What happened is that because I executed the script in tutorials from tutorials folder, so what it did is it created that db.sqlite3 file here. Okay, instead of using this file, it used this file. Okay, which is fine. I think it did save the data. I just need to open this file instead of that. Let's remove this one first. Add a connection, SQLite, select file. Let's start tutorials. This is the one. Okay. Connect now. Now let's try to run this query again. Okay, so those who are confused, so what happened is that, let me just show you the script first. So when we have this this is the one. Okay, once I click on this one, this play button as run button, basically what happened is that it simply executed the script inside of this tutorials folder. If you look here, it ran the script in tutorial folder instead of Flask API folder. So what happened is that when this created a table, instead of raising an error or connect, when I typed SQLite3.connect db.sqlite3, instead of raising an error, created another db file and saved the table and all the rows in that table. So which is fine. All right, now let's see. I think I have already executed this, so let's just run it again. Okay, as you can see that we have the table. Let's have a look at it, and we have this ID, which means that it also increments automatically, and we have the codes, and we have the author names. All right, now what I'm going to do is the next step is to use Flask API and fetch. I'll create an endpoint using Flask API. So far, if you have any question, just mention in the comment and I will try to answer. Okay, now let's open this Flask API file, and to create a Flask API, I'll import Flask. If you haven't already installed the Flask library, just go to your terminal and type pip3 install Flask. Okay, I'll probably have already installed, so it says I'm already satisfied. You can do that with pip install Flask, pip3 install Flask, and using Python 3 or Python -m pip install Flask. Either way, it is going to install Python in your computer. Sorry, Flask in your computer. Okay, the next step is let's import our Flask. From Flask, import Flask with capital F, and another thing that I will need is JSON file, because I'm going to return JSON file, so JSON response, so I'll need that. Oh, all right, now let's create an app. To do that, app equals to Flask, and inside bracket just type name. Okay, now we have the app, and now I'm going to create a method that is going to send that is going to receive request and respond that. Okay, so let's create a decorator first, app.route, and inside of that, first is the endpoint, let's call it data, and second is the methods. Methods, and method I'm going to use for here for this is get. Okay, and now let's define a method get data. You can call it anything, but I'm going to call it get data. Okay, now here I'm going to simply return JSON file, and first let's test it. Let's try to return a dictionary data, and this is data. And to run this, let's use name equals to man, and inside of it let's run our app, and make sure to set debug equals to true. Alright, I think we are all set. Let's try to run this app and see if we have made any errors. URL must end with a forward slash. I think we did. It does end. Okay, beg your pardon. It's supposed to be first slash here, not there. Okay, let's try to run it again. As you can see that it is running successfully. Let's try to run this again. As we didn't configure this page, so it's just going to show us not found. Let's just go to data. Alright, now you can see that we have got the response data. This is the data. So if you look here, I just inserted data as a response. So let's try to use the data from our SQLite database and return that in our website. So this is basically a simple data API endpoint that returns the data in JSON format. Okay, and let's go back to our application, and now this time I'm going to use the cursor and connect with SQLite database first, and I'll use select statement to get the data, and I'll show the data on the browser in a response of the browser. Okay, let's first import SQLite 3, and here I'm going to create a connection first, just like I beg your pardon, connection equals to SQLite 3.connect. Here I'm going to add a path. So the best thing is to use just a path of this copy path, and let's come back to our Flask API and simply paste it here. This way it will not create any confusion. Okay, sorry, import SQL3. Alright, now that we have our database, and next thing is I'm going to create a cursor here. Let's execute our query. Let's call it a data equals to cursor dot execute, and let's you select everything from, what was the name of our table? Flask API table, and and what will happen is that this query will return all the values from this table, and what we want is, let's just print those values and see if we can get the value. Okay, let's try to run this. Okay, database is running. SQLite cursor now execute. I guess I have this wrong, execute. All right. So remember that the reason I have set debug equals to true, that's why it is showing me this this attribute error in this browser. Okay, if you set this, if you don't set it or set it to false, it's not going to show these errors in your browser. All right, now let's see if it is working fine for this. Let's close this server and run it again. Okay, let's go back to browser, run it again. JSON serializer. All right, data is supposed to be dot fetch all. Okay, as you can see that the API is working fine now, that I have sent the request to data, and now I have got the data, and against it we have all the like values. First one is the key ID, second one is the code, and third one is the name of the author. So next thing is what I can do is I can add few more things here, and add another endpoint and make sure that we get the data that we want. Okay, not all the data. So let's create another API endpoint. This time let's call it again app.route, and this time it's going to be data slash, and I will need a key which is string, and let's call it ID. Okay, and it's also going to be methods equals to get. All right, now let's go back to get. Let's call it get ID. Okay, and next thing is now here is a little bit we will have to do some stuff here to make sure that we get the data that we are we want. Instead of getting all the data, we will get specific response of that have specific ID. Okay, so let's do that and see what we get. And again we are going to use this part of the code. Okay, now that we have connection and cursor, don't forget to, okay, one more thing here is that ID is not a string, and here I'm going to use this ID. Okay, all right, now we will pass ID here, and we will get some specific response instead of all the response. Okay, now to get the data, let's modify our select query here and only get data where we have this ID. To do that, let's type where ID equals to ID. Just need to format it. All right, I think formatting ID is already an integer, so we don't need to worry about it. Now we will get the data, and we can simply response it. Let's try to run this one and see what we get. Okay, if I run this, I'm going to get the same data, but if I try to run this, if you look here, I've got the first code only. Now to change it, I'm going to send 2, 3, 4, sorry, 4 and so on. What's happening here is that whenever we send a request to let's say data slash 1, what happens is that this 1 is passed on to this method as ID, and then we are sending this execute select statement, and we are getting the response of that ID, specific ID. So this is how you create an API, and this is how you generate API endpoints, different API endpoints. You can also use string parameters, and you can convert the response that we get from this execute query. We can convert this to a JSON file as well, dictionary as well, so you can further manipulate it and get the response that you want. So this is it for today. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, you can ask, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Have a good day.